I've drummed it into our players that they are privileged to play for you.
Corner taken quickly, Origi! Yeah!
And mission impossible is accomplished. It's 7 for Liverpool. Sensational, astonishing, incredible.
Du hører på Pausepraten, en podcast fra Liverpool supporterklubb Norge.
Hei og hjertelig velkommen til en ny episode av Pausepraten. I dag har vi med journalist David Lynch som skal svare på noen av spørsmålene som vi lurer på og snakke litt om ståa i Liverpool nå 2 uker før sesongstart. Hi David, how are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. A little bit tired at the moment because of these pre-season friendlies being kicking off at 12:30, so I ended up getting in bed at around 4 once I filmed a video and everything like that. But it's good. It's worth doing, I think, because it's good to kind of get an insight into the new manager, and I do think this pre-season's even more exciting than the usual ones because there is that element to it. We're trying to work out what it's all going to look like. So yeah, it feels like it's worth staying up, but I'm a little bit tired at the moment.
I looked at the results from 2019, which was the best period under Klopp, and we lost almost every game in pre-season. And they proved that didn't matter. But this time maybe we should read a little bit more into the games.
Yeah, because I think the difference is that going into seasons under Klopp, and especially at that time when you knew that they had a really good team, it was really sort of all about definitely not about results, and it never is about results even now. But even poor performances you could kind of write off because you knew, look, he's given them double training sessions in the day of a game, all that sort of thing. These really are about fitness and sharpness. But I think when you've got a new manager there, it's slightly different because, they can't just stumble into the season and it's going to click like that. You have to start seeing the signs that they can play this slightly different style of football. You need to see that encouragement because it's not like under Jurgen where every player who was involved, they knew their job, going into a season, and they knew off the basis of the previous seasons that they could click into gear, and they once it all kicked off and the serious football started, that they could just start doing the jobs then. But I think this time around, you need to see those encouraging signs, and I think there have been some, good performances, and I think last night as well, good to get a win over a side that's going to be near the top of the Premier League, particularly when they had so many, a stronger squad, I would say, and more sort of familiar names back. So I think a lot of encouragement so far from what we've seen. And I think that's been necessary. I think we wanted to see that.
Especially in the first half, you can see the patterns of play. Maybe that's Slot want to see in the team. The 2 goals were great. Who do you think impressed most last night?
I think the obvious pick in terms of who impressed most is probably Harvey Elliott. I think he's looked good in pre-season in general for what we've seen of him, and I think back end of last season when obviously the manager's leaving, but Harvey had played himself into the team, and he was kind of a nailed-on starter at that point, and you think probably more than most really would have been really disappointed that the manager was going because he'd got himself into that position and he could have almost rode that momentum into this season and been a starter again. But I think looks like he's kind of, in a mood to pick up where he left off, really, and think, well, even though it's a new manager, I should be in this first team. I mean, he's been in pre-season from the start, and I think, he's got all the qualities. And I also think, actually, under this manager, it might even be a style of football that suits him slightly better. The midfield is going to be less workmanlike. It's going to be more about sort of what quality they can put in that area, and he has got an awful lot of quality. So I think it could be a really, really good fit for him, and I think he's really grasping his opportunity. I thought yesterday 2 absolutely sumptuous assists, and his general play in terms of his pressing and work rate, which is always going to be there, was looking really good as well. So he's in a really strong position, I think, to start the season in that position in central midfield. And if he does that and plays as he has done so far, then it's going to be really hard to get the shirt off him, which I think is really encouraging because I like him as a player. Like him as a person as well, to be honest, to deal with. So I really hope he can keep that up and keep his place in the team.
Looked like he is more for number 10, and Jones and Szoboszlai got more of the defensive responsibilities. That would probably suit him as well, and some other players. You kind of get an idea of the midfield, how Slot wants to see it.
Yeah, it's going to be different, isn't it? Like you say, it very much seems that even though he kind of pushed back, didn't he, in his press conference when he was unveiled about the idea he uses a 4-2-3-1, and yet you see a lot of signs in those build-up of it being very much a double pivot and then one ahead of them. That very much is the composition it looks like he prefers in build-up in midfield. So, as you say, I think with Elliott, that really would suit him in terms of being in that sort of number 10 position and kind of pulling the strings there as a kind of David Silva type, or to use a more recent example, Martin Odegaard even for Arsenal at the moment. So he's a really, really good fit for that role. In terms of what they've got behind that and who they've got who's a fit for the double pivot, I still think that's a conversation to be had between now and the end of the window, and I still think that's an area that's got real potential to be strengthened. Because I just think the profiles aren't exactly perfect for what you want in there. I think McAllister definitely when he comes back, but maybe the others are not perfectly suited to it, and you could probably do with maybe someone else who's a little bit better in those deeper areas. So it's an interesting one, but it's a definite change, and obviously the way that Arne Slot uses his midfield is going to be very different to how Jurgen Klopp did. So that's one of the big changes we're going to have to get used to.
Many fans are screaming for a new kind of number 6, as we're used to have with Fabinho, but maybe that role is gone now. If they're going to use the double pivot, as you say, with 2 more holding midfielders, what does that do in terms of change in strategy and?
Yeah, well, my thinking around it, because he's using that double pivot, I kind of initially thought, oh, well, maybe that gives you license to go for someone who's a little bit more of a pure destroyer. So, Fabinho had to be world-class on both sides of the ball because all the play was coming through him initially in build-up, and also on the other side of the ball, he had these huge spaces either side of him to cover. I actually sort of thought about it since, and I actually probably disagree with myself now, and I think about it maybe in a different way in terms of, maybe it's not about having a pure destroyer in there. It's about actually, you could possibly, because you've got 2 men there shielding that defence, you could actually have someone who is less capable in the defensive side, but kind of okay at that work. Obviously, they've got to be good at the defensive work, but not quite that someone who runs around and wins 100 tackles a game or anything like that, but just another ball player. So you put together, say, McAllister and another who is of a similar profile to him, actually, in terms of really good at progressing the ball, decent in the tackle, but not an out-and-out defensive midfielder. You put 2 of them next to each other. They don't have as big a spaces to cover, so that makes it easier. And then obviously it's all with Slot about the best way of getting through the thirds and being able to create those little boxes and triangles to create numerical superiority in the middle areas and then use your quality in passing. So I'm almost kind of leaning towards now that the profile has changed towards that sort of a bit more of a passer really, and that would kind of fit in what we saw at Feyenoord when Mats Wife was kind of his player who's a bit of a go-to in that area. So really interested to see how that plays out now in terms, and whether that's made it easier because Liverpool over the past few windows have, outside of Caicedo and Tchouaméni, have never really seen someone who they thought was a great fit for that lone pivot, and they obviously weren't able to get those 2 anyway. So, is the net widened a little bit now? Is there a bit more scope for them to go for a slightly different profile of player, and do they think they can find that player? And I'm encouraged that they maybe do because of what's happening with Endo at the moment. So that's a really sort of interesting storyline, I think, between now and the end of the season. Or the end of the summer, rather.
That was going to be my next question, because where does that leave Endo? You wrote the story for us this week. And for those who haven't read it, what's going on with him?
Yeah, so obviously with Liverpool, we know about them rejecting a bid, and I think it's really telling that information has come out when it did. Obviously that rejected bid was a few weeks ago, so Liverpool have kind of sat on that information and thought now's the time to release it. And I think that kind of tells you there's an openness there to sell an Endo. There's a willingness to put him on the market for, and they're putting out there what the kind of money they're expecting would be. If they kind of get near break even on what they paid Stuttgart, they would be happy with that, and that kind of aligns with my understanding of the situation. And obviously, that's interesting in terms of if they're going to make that change there. They obviously do think that they can find someone out there, because they're not going to be willing to let him go unless they've got another holding midfielder that they can bring in. But they obviously I think it suggests that they found someone that they like and someone they think is possible. But it's all about what happens next in terms of there's no guarantees that Endo goes, because he's obviously my understanding, as I wrote in that piece, is that the player is at the moment absolutely resolved to fight for his place. He wants to prove the manager wrong. He wants to show what he's all about. And obviously that's difficult because, again, my understanding is the manager at the moment doesn't quite fancy him, isn't massively convinced by what he's seen. And it's all about, will he be able to change that between now and the season starting? And, if he has honest conversation with the manager and the manager says, look, I really can't see you in my team very frequently this season, does he eventually fold on his desire to stay and kind of, give up on that and think, well, I can go and play football elsewhere and there's an interesting move for me here? And of course, does a club actually come in for him? So there is interest in him from the Bundesliga, but there's a lot of kind of what ifs circling around Endo at the moment in terms of what Liverpool do with that holding midfield role and a lot of kind of dominoes that need to fall into place. So it's that's going to be a really interesting story between now and the end of the summer and kind of one to keep an eye on.
Do you know what the primary reason behind Slot not rating Endo is? Is there one thing? I think just
in terms of, he's not that pure ball player, is he? I don't think he's a bad footballer. I think that was some of the elements, kind of something that actually surprised me a little bit about him in Jurgen Klopp's first season, that he's not bad on the ball at all. He really is kind of, he can move it well, and he's a decent player in that regard, but he isn't Alexis McAllister levels of firing the ball through the lines, is he? And I mean, you could see what Slot really wants from that position with the fact that he's used Ione in that deeper position at times in pre-season. I mean, you look when he came on against Betis and he fires that ball through that leads to the goal. That kind of level of progression is clearly what Arne Slot needs from the people who are coming and dropping into that double pivot. I just don't think Endo's got that. He is more kind of leaning towards that destroyer side of things, isn't he? So I think it's very much sort of aligned to that he's not fancying him. And also, from Liverpool's perspective, he was, very much kind of a short-term signing anyway, wasn't he? It was viewed as that. So, the idea that they would move on from him having come in, achieved his aim of getting Liverpool back in the Champions League, winning a trophy, they're probably already ready to move on from that short-term signing now. So, I think from the club side and the manager's side, there's kind of alignment on that. But as I say, still things have got to come together in terms of whether that works out, which is obviously a club actually coming in for Endo and putting the right money on the table, the player being willing to go, and then obviously Liverpool being able to source the replacement that they're looking for at the moment.
If he refuses to go, do you think the midfield will be as it is, or do you think they'll go ahead and sign someone?
I think this is a difficult one because I think under Jurgen, absolutely no question. I mean, to be honest, under Jurgen, I think Endo would have been given another season anyway. I don't think there's any question about that. He was all about loyalty, wasn't he, to his players, and kind of, he wouldn't have give up on someone like Endo after a season. The big question is now is Liverpool's lack of ruthlessness at times, which they've been criticised for in the transfer market the past 4 or 5 years. How much of that was Jurgen Klopp driven, and how much of it, how much has things changed with this new regime that's come in with Michael Edwards and Richard Hughes? That for me is a key question. And to be honest, from my perspective, a bit of an unknowable at the moment. We just aren't certain really whether that is going to be, they're going to absolutely bomb him out in a way that we haven't seen with players in recent years at Liverpool. Again, another interesting storyline between now and the end of the summer, but I think really, really hard to predict how that one's going to go, to be honest.
If you ask me, it's a good sign that there's no panic in the market. It seems Slot is happy with the squad going into the season, and he wants to look at everyone before they sign new players. So do you think that as well, that it's a good sign for the club?
Yeah, I think the one thing you could say is that, Liverpool are going into this summer. I know there's a lot been made of the fact that they haven't really sort of, they're the only Premier League club that hasn't signed a player. They're one of the very few across Europe's top 5 leagues. Actually, they haven't signed anyone, but they don't actually need very much. You're not panicking to try and get someone in thinking, well, if we have to go to Ipswich with this squad, we're in serious trouble. It just isn't like that. There's a very, very good squad there, and I think there is no panic there. I think there's a couple of areas you could strengthen, and Liverpool are definitely looking at the moment. But it's you could go into that first 3 or 4 games knowing that this squad can win games as it is, and then if you can add to that, gives them a real chance to go on then and really win something and challenge more consistently than they did last season. I think again, something I've wrote in a column for you guys recently is about, I think outgoings are massively key to this window in a way that's kind of underrated, really. I think, we talk about Anthony Gordon and that left wing. Luis Diaz is an issue there to be solved, and again, we have to wait and see what happens with that. I think, left back / centre half, Joe Gomez, Kostas Tsimikas, what's going to happen with those? Those are all conversations that are ongoing with the manager at the moment, and some of those players are actually waiting for clarity in terms of what the role is going to be this season. And again, in central midfield, as I say, Wasaro Endo and what they do in holding midfield. So it's not about kind of sell to buy or anything like that, but in terms of opening spaces up in the squad, this squad is, it's got a lot of players in it, and a lot of good players, and there has to be movement out, I think, to make things happen in terms of incomings. But I also think there's big chances that some of that outgoing movement happens, and therefore that will make this a kind of busy end to the window, which is what Richard Hughes predicted.
We have received a lot of questions from our listeners, but most of them are more or less the same question. And I don't think you have an answer, but everyone wants to know, who are we buying?
Yeah, it's a good. Well, I can tell you now that if I knew that, I would absolutely be writing it every single day. Which is, but I think, like I say, I think outgoings are a big part of this. One target you can definitely put down is obviously Anthony Gordon, a player that Liverpool definitely like. They make absolutely no secret of that fact. And if something does move with Luis Diaz, I think he'd be front of the queue really to get him in, and I think he would be a really good signing as well. I think he's a fantastic player, and obviously wants to play for Liverpool as well. So you can jot that one down as one that you definitely expect Liverpool to target. But beyond that, I think profile of the defender is going to be an interesting one. As I say, that the Tsimikas thing. Is that going to, if he does eventually decide that there's not going to be enough minutes for him this season, and maybe Joe Gomez goes, does that leave you looking for a left-sided centre-half who can also play left-back and gives you that versatility? I think that's a profile that Liverpool have looked at in the past. You think of Levi Colwill. That's something to kind of keep an eye on. But exactly who that is, I wouldn't kind of know at the moment. And again, in defensive midfield, I think we're getting a picture of what that profile would look like, a bit more of a footballer than a destroyer than we maybe thought in the past. But yeah, like I say, in terms of names, I really do wish I had them, but unfortunately not at the moment.
The club are good at keeping it a secret as well, aren't they? So.
Yeah, well, we're back with Michael Edwards now, and so it's a complete lockdown and quite difficult to get any information out, which is fantastic for support for the club itself, but not great for supporters and journalists, I suppose, at times. But I think it's the best way to do business from their perspective, isn't it? And we do still get little bits and bobs out the club that they don't want out there, so keep digging away for those.
But you notice when they want to leak something, like with the Endo bid, then that's kind of information they want to get out via the journalists.
That's it. I mean, you can kind of tell, I think everyone can tell from the outside when it's kind of one that's been briefed and one that they're happy to have that information out there because it suits them for a reason. And I think as journalists, it's important. We always kind of question why that is and whether we're just doing them a favour or whether we're actually, presenting the truth. That, you don't want to just be a kind of a mouthpiece at times, do you? But I think it's, you can tell the difference between those. But I do think sometimes there's kind of a mistake that's made from the outside as well, is that believing that everything is a brief. For example, I've seen some complaints about, why would Liverpool put it out there that they wanted Lenny Yoro when they weren't going to sign him or whatever. But, sometimes they don't have full control over the information that comes out. I think that was one of those that they would happily not have that information come out because they probably didn't think they were going to sign him anyway. So not everything's a brief. Sometimes yes it is. Sometimes Liverpool are using the press to their advantage, but not always. And so sometimes the skill is kind of being able to discern the difference between the two.
About Anthony Gordon, we read yesterday that Liverpool were willing to let Joe Gomez go the other way. Do you know anything about that, and if Gomez is open to leaving?
Yeah, so on Gomez, someone had mentioned to me quite early in the summer, literally a few months ago, and I kind of didn't really take it seriously because I just thought the money involved would make it difficult, but that he would be open to leaving. And I think basically yesterday's story kind of feels like confirmation of that. He was willing to go to Newcastle, and I get it from his perspective. He's on the fringes of the England squad at the moment, but if he was playing more frequently, would he not have had a good chance of being a starter? He's been at Liverpool a long time and never really been a nailed-on starter, or not for a long while now anyway, and had his injuries. And, his versatility kind of counts against him at Liverpool at times. I think if he went elsewhere, he'd probably be a nailed-on centre-half and start an awful lot of games. So, he probably does think it's time to move on. But the big caveat around that, and this again was why I was kind of cynical about it early in the summer, is that I thought Liverpool would ask for a lot of money, and I think that 45 million valuation that they put on him in that Newcastle deal shows that would be the case. Really, it is an awful lot of money, but he's English, which so he counts to homegrown, which is always adds a few million on. He's only 27. He does have that versatility, so he can cover a number of positions, maybe even central midfield after last season as well. So yeah, I think he looks like he'd be a great buy for certain clubs. So, that is one that very much he has shown that openness now to go. Liverpool have shown that willingness to not stand in his way because they think he's been a great servant. So, that's kind of one that's got real potential over the remainder of the window to kind of kick off and is worth sort of keeping an eye on, definitely.
So where we are now with a month left of the window is anything could happen and nothing could happen. Is that
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you want to sort of, you don't want to come across as just sort of hedging my bets and saying, oh, well, everything's up in the air. But it truly is reflective of the transfer market, particularly at a club like Liverpool that doesn't just do things for the sake of it. It's not like Chelsea where you could say, well, yeah, we are going to sign 5 players, but and they will, but they don't have a plan for any of them, and it's absolutely chaotic and stupid. Liverpool don't operate in that way, thankfully, which I think is a positive thing, even though I think, maybe some people on social media or maybe some younger fans maybe don't think in that way. But I do think it's a positive. But what I would say is, in terms of is anything going to happen, look, the manager went on record in a press conference and said he thought he would be surprised if there wasn't a couple of signings made. So, he's put his neck on the line there. He might end up regretting that, but he has said it. So we have to take him for his word. And, similarly with what Richard Hughes said in terms of that August would be busy. So again, we take him at his word and see what happens from there. But I think, I would always side with the manager on that and say that there's a possibility that, if he thinks a couple of signings are going to be made, then the likelihood is that they will. But in terms of, we're waiting now for that to ramp up. And as I said, I still do think outgoings are going to be crucial, but there's real potential for outgoings here in the squad. So let's see how it goes.
Do you know if the money is available or if they have to sell to buy?
No, absolutely. The money's there. There's no question about that. I mean, Liverpool brilliantly run and no concerns around PSR or, they really are absolutely in a fantastic financial position. So, yeah, no questions around that. The money's absolutely there for signings. It's the sales are more just about, just opening those spots up in the squad because it is a little bit bloated at the moment, or it would be bloated if you were to add more signings in without losing players. So, that's the concern around that, not anything to do with money. Liverpool are in a fantastic position financially and ready to hit the market when the opportunities present themselves.
You mentioned the Ipswich game earlier. The new season is just a couple of weeks away. What do you expect from the first game of Arne Slot? And do you think we have to be patient and prepared for a bumpy start, or will he be ready to take the team?
I think that's a really tough first game. I'll say that. I know it's obviously a newly promoted side, and they've still got the bones of a League One squad, really. But I think first game back in the Premier League for so many years, they're going to be so up for it. The atmosphere is going to be tough. I think that makes it really tricky. So that's a big test first up, and obviously you're not going to quite have that rhythm, and not really going to be absolutely flying at that moment. So it's going to be all about getting the wins on the board. But one thing I would say about that opening fixture list is that you kind of look at it and I'd say on paper really that it's, in terms of outside of the Manchester United game, in terms of finishing positions last season, it's actually quite a gentle first 6 games. So, if Liverpool don't necessarily play anywhere near the best in those games, but get enough points on the board, and then, that builds confidence, and then they can start playing the football, I think that would be, really handy. And it's a possibility, I think, for how the season will go for them, is if they can just get over the line in those sort of early games, then you hope that slot ball will start to kind of settle in, and they'll really start to get used to playing under that manager, and it will really start to build up some momentum from there. But I think there's got to be some patience in terms of it's not going to be perfect early doors, but I do think like I say, the fixture list could maybe help them out in terms of that.
Some fans fear that they will face the same challenges as David Moyes did when he replaced Ferguson, but others compare it to when Paisley took the job after Shankly. What do you think is most realistic and comparable?
Well, I'd say that Jurgen Klopp has left a far, far better squad in a much better situation than Sir Alex Ferguson did. He obviously squeezed the life out of that last United squad that he had to win that title, even though that wasn't a squad that should have been anywhere near the title, to be honest. So that just shows his genius, but also that he didn't leave a fantastic situation for David Moyes. I think Moyes would have never been a good fit for Manchester United anyway, whether he'd been left a good squad or not. But I think the two things went hand in hand, and kind of it was a bit of a perfect storm, and that's why they were so poor. I think what Slot has sort of inherited is a fantastic squad with a good age profile, some players who can improve, but also some really good experience and quality there, like Van Dijk and Salah, who can really be leaders in the squad as well. So he's got a really good age profile across the squad and really loads of quality. And the idea is that he's going to add a couple more players as well. So I think that's, I think what he's got there is all the tools to have a successful first season. So hoping it's going to be a little bit more like the Paisley after Shankly. But obviously a lot is dependent on the quality of the manager himself. He's got a lot to prove in this season and to kind of win over fans as well after Jurgen Klopp. So we'll have to see how that goes.
What's your impression of Slot after watching press conferences and trainings?
Yeah, he seems relaxed in the job, which I think is good. Doesn't seem overawed in these early days, and I think kind of has a little bit of a steeliness and seriousness to him as well, alongside the fact that he's kind of calm and will make jokes from time to time. I mean, you're never going to get another Jurgen Klopp or anyone kind of as gregarious as that. So wasn't it kind of expecting that, to be honest? But I like what I've seen early doors. Seems to have a good personality that the players are liking as well. They're speaking really highly of him, not just sort of in interviews, but also kind of privately as well. So that's hugely encouraging. And I think he just seems to have a good manner around the players on the training ground and be really hands-on with that sort of stuff as well. So I like what I see, but obviously the biggest measure of all is always going to be the results. And I think you can be the nicest guy in the world, but if it's not working out in terms of results, then you're not going to keep the fans on side for very long at all. So he does have to get results, but I like what I've seen so far.
When we're watching pre-season, it's easy to forget all the players that are still on vacation. So we have all 6-7 players coming back as well. That will strengthen the team. One of them is Trent Alexander-Arnold. And one of our listeners, Marius, wants to know what your gut feeling about Trent's future at the club. Will he be tempted by the Galacticos with his best mate Bellingham at Madrid, or is his love for Liverpool too strong?
I think, again, it's one of those where I always want to take the player at his word in terms of he said he wants to be Liverpool captain, he loves the club, he wants to stay. So I still always lean towards the side of him signing a new contract. There's no panic yet at Liverpool. It's a situation where it was always going to be that he comes back and then they sit down and thrash this out. And I've said this before, really. I think, it's easy to blame Liverpool, isn't it, for how they let him get into this situation with his contract being a year out, a player like that. But ultimately, Jurgen Klopp could never guarantee, could he, over the last couple of years that he was going to be here for the next 3 years. He couldn't sit down with Trent and say, you sign a contract now, me and you for the next 3-4 years, whatever. So that always was going to push it back. And then obviously putting in a new regime and a new sporting director, things are really changing behind the scenes. So, again, that delays it. And then there's a tournament summer where they're not able to sit down and talk about it. So that's why it's, Liverpool aren't entirely blameless, but I also kind of sympathise with how they got into this situation. So that, it's just one of those. But like I say, I kind of lean towards him signing one. I think he's shown a desire to do it. Liverpool have frequently shown that when they've got a world-class player who's entering the peak, that they will reward them and they will pay the big wages. So I've a very expectation that they are willing to do that with Trent, because he's a massively important player in the heartbeat of that team. So yeah, my gut feeling is that he will sign. But obviously, I'm sure he will be slightly leveraging that Real Madrid interest in contract negotiations, as he absolutely should. But I would expect that an agreement will be reached there, because Liverpool don't want to lose him. And
any news on Van Dijk and Salah?
Yeah, so Salah I'm always massively sceptical about this one. I just think the amount of money he's on makes this a really, really difficult negotiation. Obviously, the age-wise as well, he's kind of, over his next contract, can you justify giving him 350 grand a week again? I just don't know because of the age profile now. And obviously, I still think he's got a lot of goals left to score. And I think a couple more years at Liverpool would be perfect. But is it a couple more years on 350 grand? I don't know. And he's obviously got huge interest from Saudi, and it would be on a lot more money than that as well. So that is the one I'm least optimistic about. Not completely ruling it out or anything like that. And I think, ideally Liverpool would love to keep him for another couple of years. And I think he would love to stay. He absolutely loves being at Liverpool. But I think that is such a difficult contract negotiation. And I think with Van Dijk, slightly different, slightly more optimism I'd say I've got about this one, because I think, he has consistently said to us behind the scenes that he wants to stay. He's desperate to stay. He wants that new contract, and he's on slightly less money. He also plays as a centre-back, and I think centre-backs, they can play a bit longer, can't they? He can, and he's so intelligent that, he doesn't necessarily need to be as quick as he was, 3 years ago or whatever. So, I think I'm slightly more optimistic on the Van Dijk one, and slightly sceptical about whether Salah will get done or not. But, with Van Dijk again, that's another one like Trent, waiting for him to get back off holiday and they'll sit down. Salah, as I say, slightly more difficult one, so maybe we'll see slower progress on that. But those first two, I think there's every chance that once they come back that we'll see that kind of get thrashed out as quickly as possible.
One last question. This week, Billy Hogan said that FSG have no plans for further expansions after the Anfield Road stand was done. Joa asks if you know why they aren't going for another stand as well to expand, especially when Manchester United are going for 100,000 capacity. So
yeah, I think that's a fair point in terms of what, you've got to look at what your rivals are doing. Arsenal are talking already, aren't they, about an expansion as well. So, you don't want to get left behind. But obviously Liverpool have done an awful lot of work to get Anfield to where it is at this point. And I guess with the other expansions, I guess the conversation is that it's just extremely difficult to do. I mean, you look at the Kop, what would you do there going back out over into Walton Breck Road? Is that even possible? And the disruption that would create in the local area. And then obviously the Kenny Dalglish stand there, you've got housing just really tight to it. So pretty much impossible to go back onto that, because you're not going to create a situation like you did around the main stand where you allow those houses to fall into disrepair. I thought obviously Liverpool acted very poorly around that, actually, the way they went around that. So wouldn't like to see a repeat of that, if I'm honest. And I think the difficulty of expanding the Kop is a big reason why they maybe wouldn't go further or haven't got any plans in the short term to do it. But I agree, I kind of think it's a shame. But I'm also kind of torn, because obviously if they couldn't do that expansion and they wanted a bigger stadium, that would mean moving, even if that's to move on to Stanley Park or whatever. And I think that would be very sad as well. I wouldn't really want Liverpool to move away from Anfield. So, I can kind of see both sides of it, but I do think it's worrying from the perspective of being left behind by your rivals. Particularly Manchester United, where they already generate an awful lot of money from Old Trafford. But yeah, for FSG, I kind of get the business case is that it's kind of hard to make it make sense at the moment, and really difficult to do, particularly when they've only just completed another big infrastructure project there with the Anfield Road end.
Just to finish, how are you feeling about the season from where we stand now?
Yeah, optimistic. I think, I've really liked what I've seen in pre-season. I think you've got a smart manager, a good tactical manager who seems like the players are bonded with really well so far. Obviously, I still think this is a fantastic squad that could, and I do think actually, as much as there are improvements to make, and I'd love them to see them sign that couple of players that Slot has talked about. I really would like to see that. But I think, Liverpool, there's almost 10% on the table for them there if they just don't get as many injuries as they have been doing in the past few seasons. I think an underrated sort of aspect of the problems that Liverpool had in the latter part of Jurgen Klopp's reign was that he was just constant with injuries. He just couldn't keep anyone fit or keep them in rhythm, and it was just a massive, massive problem for them. So I kind of like to see that sorted out. And if Liverpool can keep, even if they made no changes, and I still think they will, if they could keep this squad fit for the entirety of the season, I think they would go further and challenge for a bit longer. So, that for me is number one aim for the season, really. And I'm hugely optimistic that if they do that there's a really good season ahead, because I like what I've seen from the manager. And yeah, hopefully those couple of players in as well to strengthen it further. And I think Liverpool are in a really strong position.
I agree. Thank you so much for the update. And we'll see you in Oslo in a month, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, very much looking forward to that. Absolutely can't wait.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.